It's evening in the green room. I haven't recorded here in quite a while. It doesn't have ideal lighting or really a good setup. Um, but I had some thoughts I wanted to throw out here, and I was too slack to go downstairs and bring my whole rig with me down there and get set up again. So I really should be asleep. Um, I want to share some thoughts on a couple more films that I watched to commemorate Halloween 2021. Okay, so both of these are kind of, on the lower budget side, one more than the other. They're both from the early 1970s, and they both they have a certain charm to them, despite their at heart maybe not being much to them. I'm not sure how to describe that exactly. I am gonna bring something up I want to look at real quick here though, and double check on. Okay. All right. So the first one of these that I want to talk about uh, came out in 1972, and this film is called Blood Sabbath, directed by Brienne Murphy. I'm thinking it's a female from the name, and there's also a Lisa Fluitt who was a co-producer, so male writer. So there was, some female talent here among the crew and in charge. This film kind of, I don't want to say it fell off the radar, even though it's ever on any radar. But I never saw it for rent that I remember when I was a kid. But it's hard. I can't find an original movie poster graphic for it anywhere online. But I see all the different video covers, and some are just ridiculous looking. There aren't too many really nice graphics there. So I'm not going to use Blood Sabbath as my thumbnail, as I'd kind of planned, just because the title will grab you. I'll use the other film I'm going to talk about. So Blood Sabbath, it's pretty simple, and it's reminiscent of some other films that I'm sure you've seen, and even a couple of other films that we've talked about, even recently, like Incubus. It's pretty similar to Incubus. I don't know. I think they may have seen Incubus in its very brief run in the 60s. So it stars Anthony Geary, also known as Tony Geary. Of course, Anthony Geary was an unknown actor at that time. He was about 25 when the film came out. And the thing about him is, in 1978, he joined the cast of the soap opera General Hospital as the character Luke Spencer, and he became iconic. And over the years, he was so popular that he had kind of an ironclad contract. He could come and go as he wanted. He could take every summer off to vacation at his chateau in Amsterdam. And he was the highest paid soap performer by far when he retired in 2015 at the age of 68. Now he lives in Amsterdam. So he's a very well-read guy in real life. He's a very erudite guy. He is really an intellectual who just took his craft seriously. It's just this craft that enabled him to live a really free life the way he wanted to live, just happened to be daytime TV. So, but he took it as seriously as if it were, any other heavy film or stage job. So anyway, this is him in the early days. His acting, however, is a little tenuous in this. Basically, he plays this guy. What is this guy's name? David. Yeah, David. And David is, that's all we know is his name's David. and he seems to have a memory problem. He's kind of like a hitchhiker, and these hippies make fun of him and throw shit at him, and I guess that's some kind of commentary on the hippies, spitting on the Vietnam soldiers when they came back. But yeah, he's come back from the Vietnam War, so it's one of those many, 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 many movies where uh, the Vietnam War veteran is the protagonist. Sometimes when it's not even relevant to the plot in any way. Uh, in this case, they draw a few little parallels here and there, especially toward the end, but um, they don't really have the budget to execute. Uh, but a tiny supposedly taking place in Vietnam flashback, but it's not even as convincing as the Vietnam scene at the beginning of Antonio Margheriti's Cannibal Apocalypse, which was filmed in the woods of Georgia, so near Atlanta. So it's more like just somebody's backyard, and he's in some army gear, army shirts and fatigue. So, but anyway, when it starts, he's like a hobo. He's even got the little thing strung over his shoulder, like the stick with his backpack. And after getting away from these hippies and everything, he sees this girl swimming. Her name's Yala, and she is um, kind of like a water nymph. Uh, that's how she seems. She's wearing this really crazy wig. I mean, within the story, I think it's supposed to be her real hair, but it's really super obvious it's a wig because I think it moves a bit. But it's kind of cool though because it's kind of a white, silverish, platinum blondish kind of color and real wavy. And she's like scantily clad in kind of luminescent clothing, and basically she's just swimming around, and he's it's very simplistic. He falls in love with her at first sight. They talk, and he's like, "Can we meet tomorrow?" He's just really kind of pitiful, and she's like, "Yes." And uh, so he decides by the next day that he's in love with her, even though nothing's really. I think they kissed. So yeah, they haven't really had a real conversation or talked about having any kind of common values or even slept together. So man, he's really desperate. So he's really unskilled at this courtship thing. So she comments that she can't really be with him because she's a not a human. She's kind of a more ethereal kind of creature, and she doesn't possess a human soul. So he gets this cockamamie notion that he's gonna get rid of his soul. I mean, doesn't even know what that is, and he even kind of says that a few times. And he's earnest, but I gotta say he's really just kind of lovesick, obviously, and not the brightest guy. Um, and eventually, he gets this this older guy, this mentor, who gives him these kind of homilies of wisdom, so and helps take care of him, gives him some food, and gives him more homilies about food and sustenance of the spirit and all this stuff. And obviously, like I said, it's 1972, so um, he so they kind of hang about, and the old man tells him, don't mess with Yala. He kind of knows this area, and he knows all the forces in this area, and there are a few forces. It just takes a while before that comes into focus. The first act is kind of fuzzy and meandering, with kind of David just getting lovesick, and but then you realize there's a little bit more of a plot, or the intention to have a plot. And uh, there's like a guy called the Padre. He's like some disgraced priest, and he lives in this town several miles from where all this is happening, out in the woods, the nearest town. And it looks like mostly Hispanic people. And he is kind of this holier than thou priest, but he's also, we find in his backstory that he was a disgraced priest. Apparently, he was fallen because he had an affair with uh, this woman called Alada. I don't know what she's Alada, but she's a lotta, and she's uh, queen of the witches, and she kind of commands this sect. I guess that has some kind of uh, sway over the spirits like Yala, and she's played by Diane Thorne. Uh, One of her earlier film roles. She already looks middle aged, so I have no idea what's up with that. Uh, of course, there's some nudity, and you see her breast job, and it's really a commendable for that era's technology. They almost look real and fetching. Um, but that was kind of her. Her busty look was part of her with the skin tight shirts and everything and uniforms was part of her Ilsa. She was of the SS appeal, and her stern kind of demeanor, kind of sadistic, of course. And she's kind of like that in this. This is kind of the text. This is kind of the warm up trial for Ilsa movies. Except she's like a sorceress, and basically she decides she wants David, and she is gonna basically the people of this village with the tacit approval. I mean, he doesn't really like it, but he aids in it of the priest. Every year they sacrifice these children to this sect so that their crops and agriculture will grow. So this is kind of like before the Wicker Man by a year, and um, it's kind of crazy. And the old man who's been talking to David, he believes wholeheartedly in all this stuff. Um, and him and the Padre are kind of like, you get there's a feeling that well, I think they're trying to give you the feeling that there's a long backstory here with them and with Alada, the Queen of the Witches, but they never show flashbacks. They never really delve into it. There's some interesting dialogue and hints, but the whole structure, like I said, is pretty simplistic, but it's a little more involved than in the first act. So, uh, David says instead of sacrificing these children's souls uh, to a lot of sacrifice mine. I don't want my soul because that's the only way he thinks he can be with Yala is if he doesn't have a soul. And nobody can talk any sense into him anyway. Uh, ultimately, though, the Padre dies, gets beheaded by Alada, the character Alada, and um, the other guy dies, and Yala and David are kind of. She's trying to rescue him basically from the clutches of the Queen of the Witches, and he finally starts to gain his. He finally starts to kind of gain his manhood. He's so wide-eyed, doe-eyed, and innocent to have been in Vietnam. But like I said, he's partially amnesiac, and actually has flashbacks to Vietnam, saving some children, which reminds him of why he should not let these children be sacrificed. But he kind of snaps out of it and gets tough and takes on the cult. He loses Yala, but he does manage to defeat Alada, and she thinks she's got him as her lover forever. She'll have his soul, and you know, he stabs her not in the back, but underneath her fake bosom, and um, so yeah, and in that scene, the scenes where he's more involved with the cult and starts to get a clue about what's going on, he starts to kind of act like Tony Geary that I know and love. Uh, but the early stuff, I don't know, it's the direction, I guess. But anyway, I was curious about this movie. It was basically a curiosity piece because it had Tony Geary, and I'm a huge fan. But also because it was yet another of these occult films of the '70s. Collect them all. I love to watch these things, even the bad ones like Demon Lover, and which is interesting, and maybe I'll talk about that sometime. But I also had Diane Thorne, Ilsa, in one of her early roles, so that made it notable too. The cult movie fans, that's probably more notable than Tony Geary. But I will say Tony Geary has been in some other cult movies. Well, he appears in Penitentiary 3 as the villain. Um, and the funny thing about Tony Geary is, Jamal Fanaka, the late Jamal Fanaka directed Penitentiary 3. And also, for a time on General Hospital in the early 90s, Ken Foree, Peter Washington, star of Dawn of the Dead, had a role as his buddy. Um, and I've met both of these. Well, Jamal I never met in person, but I talked to him on the phone quite a bit and corresponded. Ken Foree I met in person a lot of times. And one thing is, I asked both of them independently, "What did you think of working with Tony Geary?" And they both said the exact same thing. He's like the most professional, coolest guy I've ever worked with. So that made me feel even better about being a big fan. So this movie you're never going to find probably on Blu-ray. It never came out officially on DVD. I've got a bootleg, a burnt copy um, that I got from one of those companies years and years ago. I think in exchange for putting a banner ad for them on my MySpace page, you let me pick a movie he could burn, and I was really curious about Blood Sabbath, so I now have Blood Sabbath. And yeah, there's not much more to say about this one. If any of those elements appeal to you, uh, seek it out. I don't really know who has it or how to get a hold of it at this point. I'm sure it'll turn up on YouTube from time to time. Uh, it probably will be on Amazon Prime. If it might be on Amazon Prime now, I'm not sure. They do have a lot of older films with really bad prints that never really got much distribution. It's like they bought out some old mom and pop video stores. But it's cool though because you get to see the stuff. It's almost like renting from Cockbuster back in the '90s, and um, so that's one good thing about Prime. Unfortunately, they've excised a whole bunch of those titles, or should I say, they've shunted them over to the you have to pay for them to watch them now, and that's kind of bogus. So I'm probably going to drop my Prime in January. There's a handful of movies I still want to see on there, but not a lot. But thank goodness I caught quite a lot of the ones that they had that I was couldn't find anywhere else before that. Um, Now Tubi's kind of taken that market. Um, so what's the other film? The other film I'm going to talk about real quick here is The Velvet Vampire, 1971, by Stephanie Rothman, and it was put out by New World Pictures, owned, of course, by Roger Corman. He was the executive producer, and he was Stephanie Rothman's mentor. I believe she also directed Terminal Island later. I'm pretty sure I used to have that on DVD and I sold it. It had both Tom Selleck and Roger E. Mosley before Magnum PI, and they were enemies. Uh, and the classic poster where Roger Mosley's like got his foot on this woman's head. She's laying on the ground, and he's got his foot on her head, and he's like, "Welcome to Terminal Island, baby." And it's also got like Phyllis Davis from Sweet Sugar and a bunch of other stuff, and a few other people you'll recognize from '70s cult films, and it was probably made in the Philippines. I don't know, but it seems like it was in that period. Um, but anyway, Stephanie Rothman, before any of that, worked with Corman on Bloodbath, which I think had a bunch of different cuts in the late '60s. I think Jack Hill worked on it, Stephanie Rothman and Corman. I don't know, maybe even Francis Ford Coppola works on it. I don't know. They did. They all kind of pieced together pieces of different movies to make certain movies to save money. I think there's a Bloodbath set on Blu-ray where there's all the different cuts. I've only seen one. It wasn't even. I didn't even see it. Actually, I have it on DVD. I got it from rarelust.com. I got it burnt about 2 years ago. That was my first time. I think and it stars William Campbell from or has him in it anyway. William Campbell from uh, Dementia 13, and also he played in the Squire of Gothos, famous episode of the original Star Trek series, and some other stuff. He he was a aging bad guy in a blaxploitation movie I saw on there too. I don't know whatever became of him, but um, anyway, so Rothman was one of the first, if not the first, female director to really kind of come into her own under Corman's tutelage and with his largesse. And one of the more talented ones, I have to say. Velvet Vampire is very well made. It's one of those movies that, again, there's not a whole lot to it, but it has a vibe. It's a much better movie than Blood Sabbath. It's much more pro looking and shot, but um, basically Celeste Yarnell plays Diane LaFanu, which is a riff on Sheridan Le Fanu, who wrote Carmilla, the famous lesbian vampire story. And she has a friend who works at the Stoker Gallery named Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula. And they live out in the desert, kind of. I think they live in California or near California, but it's definitely the West, and it's definitely a lot of people who act like Californians, including our two protagonists, uh, which are these pan and blonde couple. Uh, I wasn't familiar with the young lady who plays the wife, but the husband is played by Michael Blodgett. Um, and he, of course, let's see, who's the woman? What's her name? I'm going to go back and just cheat a little bit on stuff that I should already know, but because I've had several incarnations of this Velvet Vampire on tape and DVD. Um, but anyway, yeah, Sherry DeBoer. She plays the wife, Susan, and then the husband, Lee Ritter's played by, yes, Michael Blodgett. And Michael Blodgett uh, is known, probably the best known for playing Lance Rock in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And he's hilarious in that, and I love him in that. And he has a similar kind of swagger and delivery. He's one of these guys that, he's not a great actor, but he's always entertaining and seems authentic because he probably really talks that way in real life. He's kind of like one of these kind of hustler guys, like, yeah, man, come on, yeah, why you want me to try that, man? He's very like 70s and hippie laid back and stoner, just like Fred Williamson. Now, Fred Williamson is a much better actor, but Fred Williamson did go a long way on just that, yeah, you know what I'm saying to you. This kind of his personality, but his kind of like talking shit and kind of just being cool and groovy. And Michael Blodgett, he didn't make a splash like Fred Williamson, and he probably never got beyond the hey man kind of deliveries in his acting. But he wears them out in this. I mean, he's really good. In other words, he's likable, even though Lance Rock and Lee Ritter both have very unlikable qualities and are womanizers. They're a lot alike. Maybe Michael Blodgett was also like that in real life. I don't know. But I've always liked him. He's funny, and uh, him and his wife meet Diane, and of course she's not like them. She's kind of more goth, and she wears big hats and fancy clothes, uh, and the thing is, you eventually learn she's a vampire, but she's walking around during the day, and she's a nomadic desert vampire. So years before Near Dark, you had the Velvet Vampire, um, and I think she has some kind of thing she puts on her skin, and then she has her hat and everything, and maybe her clothes are coated with something. I don't know, but uh, she is kind of afraid of the sun, but she has kind of a routine where it won't kill her yet, and it's a lot like Daughters of Darkness, which I believe came afterwards. Similar setup, kind of couple who's kind of sexy and young, but kind of a lot of tension between them, and they meet the fancy worldly cultured vampiress, and she seduces each of them in turn. Though in Daughters of Darkness, uh, Bathory doesn't really seduce the husband. Bathory's slave, played by Andrea Rao, does. But it's kind of the same difference. They come in the middle of the couple, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those. She seduces each of them and tells each of them they're the greatest thing in the world, and Lee and Susan are still arguing and bickering and being pitted against each other. Um, until finally, as in Daughters of Darkness, the husband is dispatched, um, and the vampire, the dominant vampire female, uh, thinks she's finally got a hold of this sweet young blonde lover. Of course, in Daughters of Darkness, uh, Delphine Seyrig as Vittori gets flung through a window and staked on a tree. Uh, the girl survives though, and apparently Vittori's consciousness has gone into her body. In this movie, Susan fights to the end, and she kind of gets her lures her out of this mall into a broad daylight at the heat of the height of the sun, and takes away some of her protection. And then this it's very odd. This crowd starts. She's like, "Everybody, help me!" And and this movie they actually help. It's not like in real life or in so many movies where people just watch and don't help. And in this case, not just one or two bystanders, but like the whole everybody in this courtyard out in the open are like chasing Diane Le Fanu, and I didn't get it, but and she's trying to keep her hat down, and she's running on these go-go boots, and poor lady. So Susan wins, and Diane is gone. One thing about there's an ending part, a coda, but I'll get to that in a second. One thing I liked about this movie, it had this really nice music that recurs several times in the film. Um, it's very ethereal, atmospheric, kind of magical sounding, and it usually accompanies these scenes, which are like dreams that take place in the desert, more of the stark part of the desert than where they're hanging out with all the rocks and gravel and mountains. And um, there's a bed out there in the middle of the desert inexplicably, and there's like a mirror, and all this kind of dream symbology. And it's kind of in slow motion and diffuse light, and I mean, it's one of those things that easy to do, and you've seen it a lot. But if somebody's good at it and puts it together well and directs it well, it can be very effective. And especially that back then, those kind of things were very effective. Those kind of psychedelic kind of things, and not all of them hold up. But this one is minimal enough to where, to me anyway, it does hold up. It has a great atmosphere. It's a few scenes, so they definitely want to milk it for that effect, but they don't overstay its welcome. And it contributes to the, like, uh, during the mornings, Lee and Susan are wondering, like, okay, so what really happened? Was that a dream? Was I with Diane in the desert? And then the other one's thinking kind of the same thing. Um, and basically, I just think that's just like some symbolizing that her sway over them, her magic spell over them, if you want to put it that way, and her drawing them in. Um, and this is kind of her drawing them in subconsciously, and it's depicted cinematically, and that's really the coolest thing about the movie, as far as the way the filmmaking itself. There's not too much blood. There's a couple of killings, but it's not really particularly gory. Uh, the sex is, I mean, there's like a lot of nudity with Lee and Susan, but there's not really much overt sex between the two characters who get seduced in turn by the Velvet Vampire. So at the end, uh, Susan goes back to her friend who introduced them to Diane. He runs the Stoker Gallery, and he starts kind of quizzing him and like, how long did you know Diane? And he's kind of like, well, a long time, and she had some blood disease, and it made her sick and susceptible to heat, and so she started to kind of believe she was a vampire, like delusional. Um, but the thing is, um, Susan. it kind of figures out that okay, so yeah, Lee's also a vampire, and then they kind of show this like uh, close up shot on her. She's got this like wide, doe eyed look, which she uses several times in the movie, but it's funny just to see it. Just she's right in the middle of the screen, plain background, and she's just got this, deer in the headlights, and that's kind of the end. Like, oh, oh, he's a vampire. He's gonna kill me. Oh, I didn't make it out of the movie after all. Um, that's kind of funny. Um, that's a kitschy film. A lot of people who are into kitsch of that period love it. It's a good kind of low budget horror film. It's fun. Obviously, it's a Corman New World picture, so it's gonna have pretty good production values for not much money. Celeste Yarnell is really good in it. She passed away not long ago, and everyone else is kind of serviceable. Blodgett's pretty hilarious though. But I really like it. It's not one that I'd watch a lot, but I actually have seen it quite a few times because it used to be kind of one of those junk food, comfort food kind of movies that I would throw on with this one ex girlfriend of mine in the 90s, and also sometimes with my ex wife. And, it's easy on the eyes, easy on the ears, easy on the constitution. Entertaining enough, kind of fluffy, but it definitely has that 70s vibe. And it's definitely part of that cycle of movies. So it really, if you're into movies like Vampires with a Y, Jose Larraz, or Daughters of Darkness, this is nowhere near on that level, but you really should watch this. It's in that lineage. So if you're really into the lesbian vampire era and that kind of stuff, uh, it's essential viewing. So it went out on Blu-ray through Scream Factory briefly, and then it went out of print. It was like $15 for Raw, and now it's like I don't know, $200 on Amazon and eBay. That pissed me off. I have a DVD print that I got from Sinister Cinema years ago. I forgot how I got the VHS of it. And a long, long time ago, I rented it. And when I rented it, I liked it kind of right away. And I was already, a fan of the lesbian vampire movies and of Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. So I'm going to wrap this up. I just wanted to knock this out, just talk about a couple of, maybe lesser, to some people, lesser entries in my Halloween 2021 series. They're not classics. Velvet Vampire is very, has a great cult following. Blood Sabbath has maybe a tiny cult following, but again, it's a curiosity. It has its own kind of weird atmosphere, but it's not very well directed, so it's kind of hit or miss. Some scenes have this eerie kind of menace to them, and some scenes just seem comical, and some they're trying to be fantasy and they're just kind of wonky, and like cliche. The cult part was good, but they really weren't hardcore enough or violent enough. But it does give kind of a backbone to the movie near the end when Diane Thorne and Tony Geary, Ilsa Shoe of the SS versus Lucas Lorenzo Spencer to the death. That was great. So anyway, next time I'm going to talk about some other uh, perennial favorites. And until then, take care. And this is golden. Everything's golden here. So anyway, take care.